So you made a lot of claims in your testimony that are fairly sweeping, and I think, to begin, I think there is a clear difference between curriculum and assessment, and a lot of the concerns that I've heard teachers address deal with assessments and the use of assessments, particularly in connection to teacher compensation and assessment of teachers. Many of those policies have been supported by the majority here and by you yourself in previous legislation. So, I hope that you do listen carefully to teachers about the appropriate and inappropriate uses of data. But I specifically would like to hear, I think the idea of setting standards, so we have some notion of what to expect. I think the idea that if a student in Ohio takes Algebra 2, that we should have some idea of what body of knowledge they've mastered. If they do well in Algebra 2 here in Ohio or in some other part of the country, that employers and colleges would want to know that Algebra 2 means something and covers a particular body of knowledge. And so the idea of having a way to say that Algebra 2 you should know and be able to do certain things mathematically, and we're going to check that in fact you can do that. That seems like a reasonable thing to set some kind of common standard for across the country. And to talk about these as mediocre standards, to talk about these as standards that treat our children as robots, and to talk about these as dumbed down standards, I just don't really see how you get there from looking at what's actually in the standards. And so you expressed this concern about what you call mediocre standards, and yet the educators I've heard from have mainly expressed concern about preparing parents for the fact that test scores will probably drop because these standards are more rigorous than the standards that are what are you talking about when you say mediocre?
This committee will be in order. There will be no responses from the audience because we're here to give the respect to this witness that he is entitled to. And if you could, Representative Phillips, I'd like for you to shorten your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, with the concern expressed by educators that the report card grades in Ohio will drop because these standards are more rigorous than the standards that are currently in place in Ohio, how do you match that concern that's been expressed by many educators with your assertion that this promotes mediocrity? What are you basing that on?
Chairman Sebleton, Representative Phillips, I'll present proponent testimony that will indicate that to you because I'm not presenting myself as the expert on standards, but I have some of the finest experts on standards in the nation who will be coming to testify and share with you why these are. And as I look to my testimony, I realize that Ohio has done a poor job of serving its students. I know Ohio has a long way to go to improve what it's done. We need to improve on our cut scores. And it is going to be a somewhat painful process because we realize because under No Child Left Behind, that's why we needed the waiver. We couldn't meet what they were doing. We couldn't succeed on the NAEP test. We couldn't meet the AYP. I don't want to give too many acronyms here, but we needed a waiver because we couldn't meet that, and we lowered the standards so that people could get over them. So I realize we have a lot of work to do in the state of Ohio to improve upon our performance, to improve upon what we've done as a state. What I will present to you in terms of proponent testimony is people who have looked at standards that have worked elsewhere. Because my frustration or concern is, probably a lot of teachers will share this, when you come up with a new set of standards that are to be common in all states but they've never been tested anywhere, that's a concern. We could have a quantum failure, and I believe that's what, I believe that's the reservations that have been expressed. Even Bill Gates himself says, well, we won't know for 10 years whether they work. And we have some standards that have been utilized elsewhere that have been successful. California has had a success with its standards. Massachusetts has had success, tremendous success. Massachusetts rose to the top. We're always talking about raising to the top. Massachusetts was #1 in the nation in terms of its education performance. They had been very poor before, so it took some time to get there. So it's not going to be an immediate turnaround. However, I think what states do and what our founders expected us to do, they wanted education to be a state and local responsibility, okay? What I see is an intrusion here with special interests in Washington, and frankly, a lot of dollars from folks like the Gates Foundation, the Walmart Foundation. There's a lot of corporate interests who have an interest in Common Core, and you see them in your folders. If you read down the list, it reads like the Business Roundtable. I'm not in favor of corporations taking over education standards, and I'm not in favor, of the federal government trying to intrude with federal dollars in our standards. This is a state-based responsibility, and I feel like this is a process that was not intelligible. You talked about certain things that I voted for. I believe that I was not well informed on some of that stuff, and I think as a state, given the broader context that we're talking about here, we do need to look at how we're doing things. So I don't necessarily agree with you on that. I was not informed at the time, through this committee or elsewhere, about the implications of Common Core, about what had happened under Race to the Top, about what we had agreed to in terms of statewide longitudinal data systems. And that was prior to Race to the Top. That was back in, I believe, 2007 that we agreed to do that, and I can get you the reference here in a second. But this has been a process, a multi-year process of getting to where we got with Common Core, with Race to the Top, with the No Child Left Behind waiver. There's a series of things, stair steps, incremental steps that we've taken to get where we are. My question, or my concern, and my desire is to allow Ohio to make this decision for Ohio. Not because we want a Race to the Top money, not because we want a waiver from No Child Left Behind, not because we think that we concede that Ohio needs to do better, and you and I share that goal, okay? And I'm sure the teachers, my wife being one, want to see excellence. They want to look side to side, and they want to see excellent teachers on either side. So I share that goal, I think, with you and with the other members of this committee. But I think we need to understand how we got to where we are. We need to grab hold of this process. And my bill is an attempt to do that, to enable Ohio to make a decision, an informed decision. Not a decision where we find we're 2 or 3 years down the road and nobody knew necessarily how we got there. I've had to reconstruct how we got there, and with the help of people who know a lot more about education than I do. Sorry for the long answer, but I'll elaborate.